So I learned that I was going after ng-what, and I said, and so I made this picture of a sunset for everyone to take a look. All right. Cool. All right. So my name is Julie Ralph. I am a dev at Google. I work up in the Seattle office, and I work with the Angular team on making testing better and making engineering productivity better. I'm the primary lead of Protractor, which I spoke about when I was here a year ago. And today I'm going to be talking about what we've been doing with getting additional output from end-to-end tests using plugins, and specifically talking about making accessibility testing easy using plugins. So what's accessibility? We touched on this a little bit this morning. I was really happy to hear the prototyping team touch on what accessibility is. But a quick working definition is making sure that your website is usable for all users of various abilities. And this could mean people who need to use screen readers, or people who are blind, people who can't use a mouse. And making accessibility better for those users also helps for users who are in a car on their phone and can't really be touching it or looking at it. So the question that we wanted to solve is, how do you test for accessibility, and what does that mean? And the average dev might not know a whole ton about what the red flags for accessibility are or how to fix everything. Fortunately, there are some tools that are available that help you do accessibility audits. And we've leveraged those in addition with Protractor's plugin framework to be able to run those audits automatically, so that you get information whenever your application changes, and you can make sure that once your application is set up and has good accessibility, that that doesn't relapse later. So let's dive into this in a little bit more detail. Overview of how Protractor works. Protractor is an end-to-end test framework that's made specifically for Angular applications. And what I mean by an end-to-end test framework in this context is that it's run against a real browser that's rendering a real version of your application. This is done with the WebDriver API. And the input to Protractor is a test script, which is written in a syntax much like a unit test, which tells the user, or which tells the browser what actions it should emulate natively like a user would, and then how to get data back from what's rendered on the page and make assertions about that. And traditionally, the output from the test then is just what happens, whether those assertions passed or failed. But you can get a lot more information and a lot more results from having a script that's how a user would interact with your page. And so we've been working on the plugin API for Protractor to enable that. This is a quick example of what a test script actually looks like. So I've taken this from the Angular documentation examples. This is a test for this little checkbox that you see at the bottom. And it's written using the Jasmine test syntax, which should be familiar to you if you're writing unit tests, which you should be doing. And it shows grabbing, locating a page, interacting with an element, grabbing the value back, and then the last line here is an expectation that asserts that the element is doing what we think it should. And then the other input that you give Protractor is a configuration file, which is separate from the test script, and it tells Protractor in what environment it should be running the test script. So this is things like what browser you're using and how that browser is set up, what test framework you want to be using, where your test files are, and a lot of options that I haven't shown here. If you want to enable a plugin, this is where you'll do it. And this is so that plugins can be easily turned on and off or used for a different set of test scripts. They're not embedded in the script itself, they're just in the configuration file. You can have multiple plugins running at once. So this object is an array, and then every item in the array is going to contain the path to where the code for the plugin actually lives, and any other configuration objects that that plugin will need. This is all available now, and if you want to start writing plugins yourself, please go ahead and give it a shot. It's definitely in development, so we would love feedback on what types of features you need for your plugins and what you think would be good generic features that plugins could use against all tests. Documentation is linked here, and the basic hooks that we have for a plugin now are running on your test setup, on teardown after all the tests have finished, and then after each test case, which is like an it block in Jasmine when I say test case. And then plugins can modify the results based on what they return. So even if you had a test that had a bunch of assertions that were passing, if your plugin thinks that something is wrong and should be failing, you can modify the test output, cause an exit code of 1, fail the continuous integration build, etc. As an example, we are working on a plugin that integrates the ng-hint module to automatically give you feedback when we think that there might be not best practices happening on your page. Okay, great. So what does all this have to do with accessibility? We think that end-to-end testing is a perfect place to try out accessibility because you've got this real browser, which is rendering a real version of your application. So we know what it'll actually look like to a user. And we know some sort of script based on your test script of how a user will go through the site and interact with it. I want to give a big shout out to Marcy Sutton, who did most of the work for this plugin. She's a dev and the accessibility guru with the Angular Material Design project. And she's unable to be here today because she's speaking at the CSUN Accessibility Conference right now. But you can, I'll link to that once the recording of that is up. And this is a recording of her talk from NG Europe, where she talks about accessibility in general and the NG ARIA module in particular. So big thanks to Marcy. And this is what you can do to enable accessibility. So this is shipping with the latest version of Protractor. We will have a couple of plugins that ship natively and then allow anyone else to ship them as node modules. And there's a couple of different ways that we've enabled doing accessibility audits with the plugin. But I'm going to focus on the Chrome Accessibility DevTools plugin today. If you haven't tried this out, you can do it from any Chrome browser. Just open up the DevTools, go into the Audits tab, and click Accessibility. And here I've shown what this looks like against the Angular JS homepage. So we run it, and we get a bunch of information about errors that might be severe errors or warnings on the page that look like accessibility red flags. This is the configuration again, enabling it, and we've added the option here to treat warnings, to not treat those warnings as failures, just to notify about them. So this is the output that you actually get from running the plugin, and I've run it against the Angular docs site for an example. So up at the top, you see those dots are the assertions from the base test script all passing, and then the plugin gets a chance to come in and modify the results and output additional information. So stuff looks okay, but we get a failure on this control and media elements should have labels. And I've trimmed the output so that it'll fit on one page, but the real output then contains a link to a site describing exactly what's going on here, why this is a problem for accessibility, and what you can do about it, some potential fixes. The problem here is that this select doesn't have a label associated with it. So assistive technology like a screen reader wouldn't know what to do with it. And then there's also a couple of warnings. Image doesn't have a text attribute, and there's some contrast ratios that are off. We also ran against the Angular Material Design site, which almost gets a perfectly clean bill of health, except for a couple of errors with that contrast ratio. So as I mentioned, a beta version of this is now available in the latest version of Protractor. Please check it out, give us feedback. And we have some improvements that are underway that we're working towards for the next version. So first, at the moment, this only runs at the very end of your entire test run on the teardown hook. And this won't catch a whole lot of coverage of your site if you have multiple subpages or dialogues that you might open in various parts of your test script. So we want to modify the plugin so that it'll run at every point and then merge the results into something that's comprehensive and easy to read. And the other thing that we want to do is make this specific to Angular applications, since Protractor is specifically for Angular apps. So for example here, we've got one of these LIs with a ng-click on it, as was not recommended. And this is a problem because this isn't a focusable element, so you couldn't navigate to it using a keyboard. And a normal accessibility audit wouldn't pick up that this is an issue because it doesn't have an on-click handler, which the generic plugin is used to. It has this ng-click handler. So we want to be able to catch these cases by writing specific checks for Angular tests as well. That's all the time I have. Thank you very much.